Hello and welcome back to 2 by 2. And as usual, I always say this, but today especially so, this is a special episode. It's a special episode because I'm outnumbered by 4 millennials. I'm the only Gen X in this episode, and I feel like the sage, wise person here. But actually, I'm not, because there's actually a millennial who's the sage here, and I'll shortly introduce you to that millennial. This episode, though, is not about generational labels, it is about ambition. More specifically, why ambition seems to be disappearing from Indian workplaces. My colleague Arundhati Ramanathan, who is also the Ken's deputy editor, wrote this, I don't want to say fantastic, but frankly concerning article last month, a few weeks ago, on 24th October. We're recording this on 11th November, called Indian Tech Companies Are Spawning an Ambitionless Generation. Arundhati is here in the studio with me in Bengaluru right now, so I'm just going to welcome her. Arundhati, hi. What did you mean by India is spawning, or Indian tech companies are spawning an ambitionless generation?
Hey, Rohin, great to be back on 2 by 2 with you wonderful folks. I think the article, it didn't make itself obvious, this ambitionlessness that we're talking about. It was not obvious at all. I think in different pockets of conversations, you would hear, people who you thought of as ambitious suddenly saying that, hey, I don't see the point of all of this. Hey, I see layoffs all around me. Why should I even try doing the extra thing or going the extra mile? People saying their teams are not as ambitious as they used to be, and that, they need constant prodding and pushing, and it was not like this. So when I started hearing more of those things, I thought there is something here. And that's when we did the survey.
As a classic journalist here, right?
Yes.
There's something here.
There's something here. That it probably wasn't this pronounced before. I'm sure we've all experienced waves of ambition coming and going, but it didn't feel so pronounced. And that's when we thought we'd do the survey of the Ken readers and non-Ken readers. And nearly 600 people took that survey, and the results were quite stark. People, almost 30% identified themselves actually as saying that they're not as ambitious as they used to be. And another 30% saying that their definition of ambition has changed. So that's when we felt like there is this insidious sense of ambitionlessness creeping in India's workforce.
Okay, thank you. We're going to come back to that. By the way, we're going to link to Arundhati's article in the show notes so you can read it as well. But I want to bring in my first guest today, who's Vipul Nanda. Vipul Nanda is a product manager at databarn.ai. And I think he's got Vipul, you'll have to introduce yourself. But from your LinkedIn, you've got about 10 years of experience. Interestingly, you've gone to the National Law School, and you've worked, and then you went to ISB. It's a very interesting combination. And then you've worked in fintech, you've been a co-founder, you run a product marketing community. So in many ways, you're also the sort of person that Arundhati talks about in her article, because the strap of Arundhati's article says, and no, this lack of ambition thing is not a Gen Z thing. I want to get that out of the way, because usually when you talk about lack of ambition, lack of motivation, lack of career focus, poor Gen Zs get blamed for that the most. Oh my God, what's wrong with Gen Zs? And usually it's millennials doing the blaming. Interestingly, Arundhati said, no. This time it's not about young Gen Zs. It is about millennials, people who've got about 10 years of experience, 15 years of experience, and who are feeling disillusioned. So, welcome to 2 by 2 Vipul. And Vipul is joining us from Kerala, which is where he works out of, which is fantastic. Vipul, hi.
So happy to be here. And it's such an interesting topic to discuss, largely because, as you laid out, the issue is, I don't think it's generational anymore. I think the times and the pressures that are there on people who are working in companies spreads across the idea that whether you're early in your career or middle of your career or towards the end. I think what we're seeing with layoffs, I think what we're seeing with the introduction of AI is that that feeling of security that came with your job doesn't exist. And I think the equation for ambition has changed. I remember when we talked about startup or technology companies early on in my career, there was this almost banal line, right? Like, we're trying to change the world or we're trying to make it a better place. I think that feeling that you were working as part of a mission, that's kind of gone. And I think that impacts how people are thinking about why they're doing what they're doing. So I think I've seen, and like you mentioned, there's a community I'm a part of. There are colleagues that I work with who are Gen Z, they're millennial. And across both sets of people, I keep seeing the idea that they just don't care that much anymore. And they're more focused on themselves than dealing with this abstract idea of contributing to a company.
Thank you, Vipul. Definitely coming back to you as well. But I'd like now to introduce our second guest today, Gaston Schmitz. Gaston is a repeat guest on 2 by 2. The last you must have heard him, and if you didn't, you must definitely hear him, was an episode which we did in June of 2025 titled Where AI Can and Can't Replace Human Coaching. The reason why we'd gotten Gaston for that episode and why we've got him today is because Gaston is an executive coach. He's the founder coach at the Asian Leadership Institute. Actually, I did not know that it was founded in 1982, Gaston.
So that means I'm not the founder. This was founded when I was one. So that means I'm somewhere just between Gen X and millennial. So it was founded by Brian Bowerly, a great American coach and psychotherapist. But I'm indeed currently running the startup side of the Institute. I've been there for about 13 years. As a partner, I worked a lot in corporate, multinationals, leadership development coaching, and the last 6-7 years primarily focused on the startup ecosystem with a big emphasis on India. So even though I'm calling in from Belgium today, I'm in India every month and spend most of my week speaking to Indians, even though I do that from here. And yeah, I love the topic. Rohin, I think one of the things that I need to do as a coach on a frequent basis is I need to listen to what matters to my clients. So I have to constantly tune into what are their drivers, motivators, energy sources. We're going to talk more about that. And how do I identify those and how do I use those for the benefit of behavioral change, positive behavioral change, or shifts in people's development? And I think this is a big topic in relation to the article that you're referring to.
Does it come up quite often?
Well, the thing is, I was reflecting on this, my audience, and I've now coached over 100 VC-backed startup founders, the majority in India. I am working with people that are on the other extreme of in the article. So my clients have no issues with ambition, hunger. Fire in their belly is probably like volcano, type fire in their belly, right?
I'm going to enter that prompt into an AI.
Yes. Yes. So that is not the audience I'm normally interacting with. I actually interact with people that have incredible amounts of ambition and fire. And we often reflect on this in our institutes. It's like these founders somehow tap into some other source or energy source, right? What gets them out of bed in the morning is like at a different league than the normal population. And so I think for today's conversation will be interesting to explore what I learned from that audience that are off the charts on the other side to help us understand how to get that ambition, I think we have to look at it broader than just ambition, but how to get that fire back in the belly of the Indian
I love that
employees.
analogy. How to get the fire back in the belly. I'm going to definitely feed that prompt to an AI as well. These days, that's my thing. When I find really interesting concepts and analogies, I feed it to an AI and see what might it look like. And people, my colleagues, are just flabbergasted by the images that I post, and they're like, "This is creepy. Please stop doing this."
That is 100% true.
That was Praveen, my co-host. Welcome, Praveen, aka Millennial Praveen,
Sure.
to 2x2. What are your thoughts about ambition?
No, I think this is, again, I can't contest that it's not happening, because it definitely is happening. Like the fact that people are feeling less ambition now than it was earlier. But I think I want to just change a little bit about how I'm seeing it. The way how I'm seeing it is that, and I think Vipul touched upon it, Arundhati touched upon it, which is that I feel like a lot of what was earlier described as ambition is just a function of outcomes that people felt that they had control of. So, in other words, I work at a startup, I get ESOPs. Well, these things are going to go somewhere. Surely it's going to get some money. Oh, I joined this company. I'm going to get promoted. I mean, I have a certain expectation. If I change jobs, I get certain amounts of salary. I come and work with smart people. When I go from work to my house, I'm able to travel and the traffic is not going to be so bad. I can breathe air. So there are a bunch of these things that sort of like are, you can count on. And I feel like what has happened is, because you can count on those things, you're able to now put your whole self out. You're able to work, you're able to strive, you're able to take on new things. And I think what has happened is a lot of these things have sort of gone away, and things that you've taken for granted has gone away. And this is what Vipul also touched upon. And I feel like as a consequence, what's happening is people are no longer able to look outside at what gives them meaning, and they're now forced to look inwards. And many people are probably doing it for the first time in their lives. And when they go inside and start to wonder, what is it that I care about? What is it that I enjoy? What is it that I want to do? They come up with nothing, or they take some time to come up with answers. And we are in that period now. And that is what is really happening.
And before we dive into the actual discussion, I also want to add that there is the overwhelming weight of the external environment. There's disruption from AI. There is the fact that after the golden years of startups where people were trying to invent business models and do things that no one else is, we seem to have settled down on this thing where everyone is in some senses trying to do just things more efficiently, copy what already works and keep scaling, etc. So in some senses, the innovation and the excitement has gone out of things as well. From Arundhati's story, there's also the fact that in the last 8 years, average incomes of those working in the Nifty 50 companies have not even kept pace with the cost of living. Right? So people relatively are like, if the last decade was the best decade that we sort of lived through in India from a stock market point of view or from VC funded firms point of view, I don't seem to be feeling it. Right? And, this is what I think there was a very interesting quote from Vineet Nair, the former CEO of HCL Technologies, who's 63 years old. So he's actually a legit boomer. So now I wish we had Vineet on the show as well. We could have asked him. But he said, and I quote, "In an environment where companies' risk appetite is reducing dramatically, my generation has no right to ask about people's ambition, as ambition only comes from opportunity." So the overall external environment is companies seem to be, I mean, if you just take the example of Microsoft, like wave after wave of layoffs. It's the most profitable it's been ever, and yet it's just doing wave after wave of layoffs. And it's not just Microsoft, I'm not picking on them, right? It's true generally everywhere because people are trying to cut costs and, make do with less. That's happening. AI is eating into more jobs. Companies are saying, hey, why don't we use AI and get this one person to do the job of three, etc. The work itself is getting less meaningful. Correct. I mean, sure, you want to optimize so that in this basket, the person also adds one extra rinse soap. Correct. So that our average basket unit price checks out and becomes profitable. It's exciting in the early years, but once you've done it for a couple of years, it sort of starts to become abstract and like, what is all this, which is the point that you made, right?
Yeah.
So this is the environment which we are talking about. And And I'm going to throw it open to you. I mean, I don't want to relitigate Arundhati's article because it's actually quite accurate. I identify with both sides of it. I identify as a founder to what Gaston said that, correct, I'm excited to come to work, but I also identify with the fact that I'm an outlier. I mean, I'm not saying that like because there's something very special in me and something. In general, founders bring more energy because they are the founders. The buck stops with them. They got to do stuff. But it is one of the biggest things that I've also over the 9 years at the Ken tried to solve for, which is how do I make work more meaningful and exciting and full of ambition for the colleagues who work with me as well, right? It is absolutely important, and I don't say that. So, how do we solve for ambition? Is what I want to discuss in today's episode. And let me go to Vipul first. And then I'll come to you, Gaston, and then Arundhati, and then PGK. Should we even solve for it? Or are would we be like, no, burn it all down? This is late stage capitalism. It needs to be destroyed, and then we'll build something pure from the ground up, and it will be the most beautiful thing ever.
It'll be a meditation retreat that I will be at with Gaston. But yeah.
Now we're falling into Gaston's Asian Leadership Institute territory now.
No, but to be honest, your framing about the late stage capitalism, very appealing to, college years me. But in today's day and age, I do think there are some things that we need to let go of. And I am okay with the work-life balance being a little more of a balance now. I think the fact that Gen Z folks and younger people in the workplace are more defensive of their time, are calling out and saying managers who text me late at night, videos of, arbitrary bank employees barking at salespeople, coming out on LinkedIn. The culture has shifted towards toxifying those ideas. They were always toxic, but to put them above the threshold of people knowing about it, discussing it and saying this is bad is a big change from the times when I was growing up in like the first couple of years in my career. The expectation was you take it. No, I never liked that.
I'm kidding. I must say that.
I'm glad you clarified, because that takes me to the other part, right? When you talk about solving for ambition, there are two paths to it. And I think one thing that I think Praveen mentioned in terms of ESOPs, or in general, this idea of ownership. When you speak about your sense of ownership towards being a part of the Ken, you're dealing with a small team where a little of the fairy dust of that ownership to the close circle of people around you is easier to maintain. Now, I've worked at startups which have gone from, like I joined when they were at around 400, 500 employees. They've gone to 3,000, 3,500. So that culture shift where the people who are actually invested in outcomes has become more and more diluted as they have grown. And it's very clear. You can sense it. And I think that makes a huge difference in how people feel inspired. I still think today there are lots of AI startups where, again, people feel that everything is fairy dust and they're all on board the ESOP train, expecting that, things are going to go well, and best of luck to all of them. I think those are the small pockets where there is still that ambition. And a lot of people are focusing on those pivotal points because they see some value there. But the people who were the Sharma Chika betas of my generation, right? And Gaston, I don't know if this is a reference that would be familiar to you. It was like an old thing that parents...
I'm 100% sure Gaston will get all Indian references, perhaps even better than most of us.
Okay. But the idea that the role model at that time was not people going out into startups. It was people who were sticking with the people who decided that this was the role model, that someone who had this steady paying job. There was a government job, then there was doctors, then there was like tech employee making several lakhs, and like that was the standard. But even those jobs aren't secure anymore. And I think those same people who followed the Sharma Ji Ka Beta route became like directors at these huge companies, these global MNCs, and now are seeing themselves laid off while they're potentially less hustly or less, people focused on what they thought was a measure of how good they were. Started up, did their own thing, played the ESOP game, got lucky, because we focus on the wins, not on the losses. Primarily, most people who tried that route have lost. Like lots of people have ESOPs. Most of them are worthless and will probably remain that way throughout. I think the future remains in not trying to sell people this Kool-Aid that you're actually doing something good, but saying that it is meaningful to you and that you grow. I still see people very ambitious about learning, particularly early in their career, because they can sense that the job environment is so bad that they're desperate to learn about AI. People will spend so much money on random courses. You can see the ads about AI courses. They're so idiotic that I don't think anyone should fall for them, but lots of people do. There is an ecosystem now on training people on AI tools that will probably get outdated in a few months, but I think that ambition is there. I think the way to nurture it would be to not think at that high scale of trying to set up huge organizations. I think smaller companies still have that core of ambitious people that work and are happy to do so.
Interesting. I mean, if I were to essentially boil down what you're saying, you seem to be suggesting, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that it's very hard to sustain ambition once companies become very large. And one of the things that you talked about, which plays a significant role, is ESOPs. And ESOPs only matters if you manage to get in relatively earlier into a smaller company and stick there, right? Does that mean that you can't solve for ambition at large companies?
I think you can. I'm just saying the way we were doing it earlier doesn't work anymore because there was a perception maybe 3-4 years back that ESOPs would solve for everything. That hasn't played out in reality. And I think the perception now is very clear that ESOPs will only work if the company succeeds and continues to succeed, and that time length doesn't always make sense. These days, it's very rare to come across people who are actually spending more than 4 years at one role, right? I mean, Arundhati notwithstanding.
When I was reporting for the story,
don't
it's good
jinx
that
her.
you... Because when I was reporting for the story, a founder was using ESOPs to drive ambition in a different way. He was, in fact, making it harder to access ESOPs than what it was usually, which is that he was saying you stick with the company for at least 2 years and only then we will grant ESOPs, right? So he was trying to solve for the fact that you demonstrate sustained loyalty and / ambition.
I get from the founder's point of view, it's like if you get it too easily, you don't value it. So I want to filter for those who at least make it past, let's say, the 2-year cliff. It's a cliff in a different way.
Yeah, it's a cliff in a different way, right.
Gaston, how about you? Is ambition something we should even be trying to solve for? How do you look at it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the question is broader than just ambition. I think we need to solve for drops in energy sources, drivers, motivators. Even when I read the article several times, I think a lot of the cases and quotes point to the fact that people's energy sources evolve, pivot, change, which, by the way, is something I don't think is generational necessarily. I've seen this across generations in different periods of history in our entire lifetime. Things will shift, etc. I sometimes need to help founders even though they're at that top end of fire in the belly. Sometimes they also wake up in the morning and say, wow, I just lost energy, drive, motivation. And that process in itself is not bad. I actually think we can gain a lot of insight in looking deeply into the drop in energy and motivation. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. But I believe ambition is just one of the things that can create that fuel, that fire in our belly. There can be many other things, right? There can be making a difference, an impact, creating wealth, learning, development, enabling others to do great work, striving towards excellence, or being part of a team. Or I've seen in my journey as a coach, there's so many different things that people can be driven by. And what is important for leaders and companies is to start getting curious about what their employees are actually driven by. When I ask my clients, and I often do this, is I ask founders, in terms of your direct reports, do you actually know what drives them? What motivates them? And I often hear crickets after that. They're like, oh boy, I I'm not sure. Maybe this person, I think, is financially driven. This person, likes recognition and needs verbal appreciation. This person, is all about team, and that's why she gets fired up by being part of a team. And this person gets driven by solving complex problems. So I think there's something that leaders need to become more curious and more proactive in understanding what's underneath the surface for their employees, what really drives them. And once you have a clear understanding of that, and I even encourage my clients to map this out, to keep track of this, because this is very valuable insight. And what we normally do is we project. So the things that motivate us, we think motivates other people, right? So if we're driven by money, we sometimes think others are. But it's way more nuanced than that. So I think that's the important exploration here.
Sorry, Gaston. So again, I must say, I fully agree with you and fully disagree with you as well. Or at least I partly agree with you and partly disagree with you, because the first thing would be like an impossibility, right? The reason I agree with you is because as a manager, I get that the points that you're making are very valid, right? If you have to figure out what are the things that drive the people who are my colleagues and reports, I need to do a better job of that. In some senses, but it also means that it puts the onus on me to be a better manager, to be able to sense that, right? But the part where I disagree with you is one of the trends that's also been playing out over the last 2, 3, 4 years is that as organizations are cutting staff, one of the levels that they're also cutting is the number of managers in the system, or they're increasing the amount, the span of width of the number of people that people have to manage. So organizations are becoming leaner, and existing managers are handling more people, and they themselves are going through these, like you said, motivation loops, ambition loops, etc., and stuff like that. And organizations feel, by and large, if you've seen from the largest of organizations, they're saying we don't need as many managers. We've over-invested in managers. We could do with fewer managers. And one of the things managers were supposed to do is to be able to observe, understand, coach, motivate the people who belong in their team. How does this happen? I mean, in your solution, I get the theory part of it, but in large organizations, teams, IPO'd companies, pre-IPO companies, etc., where everyone is sort of stressed, how can we hand this responsibility over to managers to say it's your job to figure out how to get the energy levels of your employees up, or to figure out what gets them out of bed, etc., right? Shouldn't the companies put their money where their mouth is and say, if management is important to you, you need to show that you're investing into managers and management, no?
Yeah, that for sure. Companies have a role in terms of creating the right culture and the right conditions for some of that motivation to come up. I think the last part that doesn't always get spoken about is also the role of the individual to motivate and themselves and create that fire in their own belly. And because meaning needs to be created, right, by people. It's not necessarily that meaning is presented to you. I like this research that Marshall Goldsmith, a famous leadership thinker, did. He really looked at employee engagement. And a few years back, he was at a big global conference on employee engagement, and there were all these companies presenting what they're currently doing to get engagement and motivation up. And it was more than any time in history. Like, it's quite remarkable what companies are doing. But employee engagement was at an all-time low. And so Marshall was like, what is this all about? Like, companies put a lot of effort into this, leadership. And what he realized, every speaker in that conference was talking about what the company needs to do for the people, but they weren't addressing what people can do for themselves to bring more meaning, purpose, and drive to their day-to-day work. And so what they did, which I thought was a fascinating research, they basically, and by the way, even if you look at any of the research tools, right, say the Gallup motivational survey, right, and they check work engagement, these are all passive questions. Is your boss giving you clear goals and objectives? Is the company doing this and this and this? Do you have a great friend at work? These are passive ways which actually signal that employees can sit back and just receive or need to be motivated. So what Marshall did in his research, he says, let's flip this around. Let's ask employees to ask themselves 6 questions every day. And the 6 questions was, today, did I do my best to set clear goals, make progress towards these goals? Did I do my best to be happy? Did I do my best to find meaning in the work that I'm doing? Did I do my best to build positive relationships at work? And did I do my best to be fully engaged today? And what they did is they did this for about 5,000 employees. And within 2 weeks, 91% of them got better at some of these. 34% got better at all of them, just by asking themselves this question at the end of a day. And so what I think the essence of this research is that it's also important to ask yourself as an employee, how do I create purpose and meaning in the work that I'm doing? How do I increase my level of engagement and motivation, irrespective of what's currently happening with AI and all the other developments? And I've seen there's a big part, because else the risk is that we disempower employees and make it about just companies and their leaders.
Vipul, as probably the youngest person on this podcast, how do you feel about what what Gaston said makes eminent sense, right? Because I do believe Gaston said you have to create your reality. I would actually use a different word. I would say you have to discover it, right? Like in some senses. But I think both of us are talking the same thing. Create, discover. It's not a monkey which is on your boss's back or CEO's back or manager's back, right? It's your own opportunity, right? How do we solve for it? Because I realize I want to make this disclaimer that I realize the inherent ridiculousness of me saying how do we fix for this, while also saying that the fix has to emerge from each of us within. But we're discussing something which is much more widespread. So I feel like some kind of a wider solution or approach or mental model is required.
No, I agree with you. I wanted to note down those 6 questions. I'll probably catch Gaston and get them.
Yes,
Sounds
Gaston,
great.
please share that research with us.
Yeah, that would be amazing. But I think that the 2 different parts of it. I certainly have a responsibility to myself to make my life more meaningful. I fear that the vast majority of people that we're discussing in this conversation have chosen to find that meaning and fulfillment outside of work. I don't think lives are shorn of meaning. I think people are less bored. I think, unfortunately, we found quick sources of dopamine in access to YouTube and stuff. I don't think people are looking or hungry for the kind of engagement that our parents or our early generation had to face when entertainment and immediate gratification was not accessible. To be completely honest, let's be clear that we work for 2 things. We work for validation, and that's like on a hierarchy of needs. That's when it goes beyond like I'm surviving, I'm subsisting, I have enough money to pay my bills. All the good stuff, like when you are motivated, when you're doing good work, all that comes when you climb above that in the hierarchy and you start talking about some kind of validation. Either it's internal validation, which is I'm learning, I'm becoming better, or I am giving myself the opportunity to create wealth. And all of these 3 things sound like if I followed Gaston's 6 questions, I would be doing better at getting towards. So I will copy that, right? For sure. And then there is a second part of it, which is achievement or praise, which falls into the external validation bucket with impact or, your boss saying good job. I think both of these have been severely short-circuited by the external factor of stuff like AI, of stuff like the lack of predictability of outcome. Today, if I put in the same amount of effort as I used to put in 4 years ago to do a job, I would be slow, I would be inefficient, and I wouldn't get a good job done because now I have a happy shortcut to do all the more annoying bits of it, which mean I learn less. Like if I'm asking ChatGPT to pick up a lot of the, monkey work for me, that means I'm learning less about the nature of what I'm doing. And I've seen this happen with a lot of people. Initially, everyone said, I'm not going to use it. Then they started using it. And the balance between their creativity and impact and what they're creating And what that equation is now has heavily shifted towards AI doing a lot of the lifting, which means two things, right? My ego-driven desire to see my work or my impact being created, that equation has been cut in the middle because someone else is doing it. Which means if there is praise, if there is an indication from leadership that you're doing a good job, it's most likely going towards people who are delivering on dumb stuff, like they're moving faster because they're getting ChatGPT to do the work. Or there's a friend of mine, I was just discussing this with him. He's gotten promoted because he's the only one going to office. All the other coders are just like, I'm not going to bother, it's hybrid. He goes
Amazing
to office every
hack.
day. Yeah, and the point is the signal and response equation is broken. What people now perceive as productivity or good work doesn't seem correlated to the same inputs that I learned growing up were essential to being ambitious, right? Like I chased the promotion, I chased the higher salary. Now I don't know if that is going to be a function of me, ruining my personal life or not spending time with my family. So I think people are finding that. Again, I respect what Gaston is saying. And I think if you look at this at an individual level, what he's saying makes perfect sense. But if you're looking at this in terms of a trend of people finding meaning outside of work, then it is still the company's responsibility to fix for it because the output is they're not getting the kind of quality of work that they might want otherwise, which means they probably need to speak to the researcher Gaston was referring to. They probably need to get their employees to do this. That effort still has to come from them. I don't want that burden to be put on individual employees.
Vipul, I just want to do a follow-up question. You are part of a community of product managers, right? I'm sure that's a community or that's a set of professionals who are caught right in the eye of this storm right now. Because on one hand, you have AI, which is essentially saying that is the future of everything just a chat box. And then you have designers who want to be product managers and, product managers who want to do design. And then managers saying, why do we even have product managers, et cetera, all of that, right? So in the middle of this, and not so long ago, just maybe 3 years ago, 2 years ago, everyone wanted to be a product manager because it was seen this, right? What's the feel or what do they say? What's the vibe among product managers when it comes to many of these things that you've said around meaning, ambition, etc.?
I'm a product marketer, and the community that I deal with are product marketers.
Yeah.
No, that's all right. And we work with product managers, so we see their day-to-day panic. So I have some perspective on that. But I think the main thing that's happened is it's become very clear that there are people who are using AI. There are people who are using AI effectively, and there are people who are not using AI. And it's quite clear. The difference is that the people who are using AI effectively are not all doing it for the same kind of reasons that good performers would have been putting in the legwork in the past for. Some of them were just faster at picking it up than there is, for whatever reason, accessibility. You went and got a pro account. There are lots of factors that aren't directly correlated to what you're doing. But at a deeper level, I think you're right in the sense that a lot of the product managers I speak to, there is this kind of inward looking of who are we? What are we supposed to be doing? And that's true for a lot of disciplines where generalists are feeling a little threatened. Specialists are also feeling a little threatened. AI is just not taking any prisoners. But I think the general mood is people are saying, we know people are going to fall by the wayside. We want to be the ones who don't. And so they're working extra hard and they think the people who are using AI effectively are the ones who are going to get away with it.
But there's also this other part which Arundhati mentions in her article, which is a bunch of folks who've spent 10 years, 15 years in organizations are fairly well paid today, but they've seen the last many years as wave after wave of colleagues getting laid off, projects becoming more and more transactional, salary hikes becoming lesser and lesser to not even count the cost of inflation, etc. And at that stage, they're at that stage where, and I think she puts it that why bother? If this is the, if by working harder, neither am I assured of being retained by my company, nor am I assured of getting paid significantly better, then why bother? So this, I think, you said that it was corporate nihilism.
That's right.
Yeah. What did you, is that a widespread feeling, corporate nihilism?
I think in that level of in that level of management of people when they've hustled. Again, like I said before, that these are people who were ambitious. They got their promotions really quick. So that also set a precedent, right? Like the last few, like if you roll back, if you rewind about 10 years, the number of promotions, the number of salary hikes you got, that kind of set a unreal precedent as to how you must progress in your career. And when you kind of see that stalling, you're like, okay, where do I channel all this ambition? There is nowhere to go for me. Like this person I was speaking with was saying that my manager just is bent on getting me to the office and not so much about my ideas, or even if my ideas get sanctioned, there's no budget.
If that person got to the office, they might have been the only one to get a promotion, as we now know.
Indeed. Right? So I feel like there is no channel to what they can do with their ambition and energy. And therefore, they're like, okay, let me do the bare minimum.
I'm listening to you, I'm listening to Vipul, and I don't really agree. Because what you seem to be suggesting, both of you, is that, look, the people always, are seeing, I think fundamentally, at the risk of like really reducing what you're saying, is that success and the ways of success is happening has become much more random than before. And hence, that is now leading people to question things. I mean, I don't know. It was always random, right? What is fundamentally changed? Everything, that is not what it is. Again, I go back to the same thing, which is Gaston spoke about, as an example, sources of energy, right? Which, again, we agree that ambition is not the same as sources of energy. What we're saying is that people have different sources of energy. Sometimes they wake up and say, oh, I want to do good for the world, or I want to make money, or I want to do this, etc. I think what I'm trying to say is that, or I think what I'm getting at is that I feel like all of those sources of energy and the things that gave you, quote unquote, meaning have all become distorted, twisted, and all the old rules are gone. Like you can go examples after examples. Like for instance, the people who woke up and said, oh, I want to make money and I want to join this early stage startup and get ESOPs and make. Well, they are the ones who are looking at the Olas of the world and the Unacademies of the world and looking at it and saying, well, what is the point anyway? The people who say, oh, I want to work at a place, for instance, as you said, Gaston, I like to work in a team of really smart people and all of these things, and that is what gets me going. Sure, but then you come to a Zoom call and you see that half the people who are there on the Zoom call are AI agents, right? The people who basically wake up and say, oh, I don't care about the money, but I want to make a broader difference to the world and I'm going to take sacrifice in money. Sure, but then you wake up in the morning, you take your buses, you take like 2 hours to get to work. By the time you come back, you're already broken, you're tired, but it's okay. You're still making meaning in the world. And then your landlord calls and says, hey, sorry, I have to increase
you're
the
a
rent.
corporate nihilist.
Yeah, I'm saying that is what it is.
Gaston, you certainly did a number on PG.
I'll end with this last point. Okay, you spoke about product managers, right? A lot of product management was about creating meaning because it was about we were creating cool things. We were creating different things. And I was saying this because I've been interviewing for product managers and product designers right now, right? I am quite struck by the fact that if you look at every single UPI app right now in India, they all look exactly the same. Right? Why? They have all converged into a certain form of a design, a certain form of form factor, certain form of this thing, and nobody's willing to take any particular risks and chance. So if you're a product manager, all you're doing is just taking what everyone else has and creating the average of everything.
In fact,
else.
You can create an AI to do that.
Yes.
Every day, just go and look at what everyone else is doing and just tell me the delta that I'm missing and I'll wipe code that delta.
Correct. Now I'll take this one step further. Right? The fact that all UPI apps were converging, they had converged maybe like a year or two ago. All of them look the same. You know now what it looks like? If you open, say, as an example, if you open, say, Swiggy, which is a food delivery app, and you open PhonePe, you will struggle to tell the difference between their home screens. Right? They have the same bento box design. So now see what's happening. Your food delivery apps are starting to look like your payment apps. So there is this general averageness.
Like, just think about it. Logically, everything is going to that one box.
Everything is going to that one box.
ChatGPT.
Correct. So you open anything, open ChatGPT, open Claude, they all look the same with different colors and different fonts. So this feeling of averageness and medianness and being safe is fundamentally what's taking meaning out. To the point where, if you're talking about ambition, okay, here's a provocative question, right? We think that people don't have ambition. There is this subreddit called FIRE, which I'm sure you've heard a lot about, which is Financial Independence Retire Early, which is this huge movement now. A lot of people got really obsessed with in India over the last couple of years. Are you telling me those people don't have ambition? What are they doing? They are saying we're going to slog like crazy. We are going to cut off everything else. We are going to respond to nothing else. We're going to work, make money so that we can retire by the time we are 45 or 50. To do what? We don't know. Why? No idea. Are you telling me those people don't have ambition? They do. They have ambition. But they've postponed meaning in pursuit of an ambition.
Whoa, that's deep.
Yeah. And also, I think what people see as ambition for themselves and what companies want of people are diverging. I think that's where the problem is.
What is it that people see as ambition for themselves?
You want to hit a certain milestone, like the fire goal that he was talking about, or get to a certain level, the traditional trappings of career still, that you want to be X by in so many years, but the company doesn't have space to make room for your individual goals.
Or also because many of the companies these days are trying to keep a handle on costs.
Correct.
And they're not like...
Exactly.
Gaston, you wanted to say something.
For the record, Gaston used to be my executive coach, so it really feels like an executive coach session with the 3 of you watching. 4 of you watching. But okay, continue. Go on, Gaston.
I've been taking some notes just now when you were speaking, Praveen. We'll have a separate conversation.
Oh,
sure. But I've also seen the opposite from some of the things we heard. I've seen in the past, even in Indian startups, say during COVID, when sometimes entire groups of people had to get salary haircuts and they suddenly got rallied around some other energy source, right? Or I've seen companies with very low runway and everyone was sacrificing. And you can wonder, like, why is that? What happens there is the energy source gets replaced. And what I encourage a lot of my clients is to diversify their energy source. Because if you put all your eggs in one basket, and I remember this one client, my first session, startup founder, I said, what do you really want to get out of this? I just want to get to IPO, right? As they call. I said, well, okay. And then we unpack this. And what is really risky if you go all in on one thing, which might be fire, as you said, Praveen, or it might be IPO, or it might be this level of... It gets very tricky. You generally get quickly attached. And once you get attached to outcome, it gets tricky because you can't control all those variables. So how do you diversify your energy sources? Now, what I've seen is roughly people get motivated by 3 major things. The first one is progress. A very interesting research. The number one thing that people get motivated by is actually just progress. Now, progress can be widely defined. It can be financial progress. It can be progress in terms of your personal growth and development. It can be progress in terms of what you're building in the company. But progress is a very big one. The second one is purpose. The second P, right? It's the sense of meaning, purpose, contributing to something bigger than just your own small sense of self and small reality. And the third one, which I really like, is play. Once you realize, like, what I'm doing at work feels like play, it feels like fun, it's like enjoyable, like that's an incredibly powerful energy source. And I know you guys probably tap into play, right? Rohin, Praveen, but so now what's interesting is when progress drops, right? So somehow growth stalls in a startup, you get headwinds, AI, you suddenly get backlashes. If you're not getting conscious in terms of replacing that energy source with something else, you can really go down in your mood, you can get depressed, you wonder what's this all about. And so for me, these are opportunities when some of these things happen, even when progress doesn't happen. So that's where we have to expand these things. And sometimes when then progress is not happening, or in this particular period, it forces people to think and reflect on what really matters. And I actually think that's a great thing. And I don't think it's anybody's fault. I actually think this should be a co-creation process between those employees, their leaders, and the companies. Like, how do we elevate the level of meaning and purpose? And I've often seen that if you reframe a challenging period, suddenly you switch on the purpose energy source. And you realize you can rally around that. And that's very exciting. Or even though it's hard, we're having fun together, building something unique, and then we switch on play. And so I think this diversification is quite critical, and to start doing that before you are forced to do that.
That's very interesting, Gaston. And just to this couple of things. I first want to, before I come to your point, I was just thinking. I don't know how many of you read it. If you haven't, you must. Warren Buffett wrote his last shareholder letter yesterday, and I was just reading it today morning. We'll link to it in the show notes, and it's fantastic. It's a guy who's 92 talking about the life that he's led and how he's built an organization which will continue beyond him. And many of these things that we talk about, that is there a logical conclusion to what he's built, is it doesn't matter, right? Because you see he's been true. He and Charlie Munger have been true to what they wanted to do and enjoy it along the step of the way. They've stayed the path, and they've in the process lived a great life. Charlie Munger is no more. And they built an organization which will, stand the test of time. And I think, right? And I think it's a great contrast to some of the things that we discussed earlier, which I think, Gaston, you mentioned, which is if you tend to have a very specific end outcome, which could be whatever, it's an IPO or I need to retire by the time I'm 40 and stuff like that. And I think, it doesn't work out because sometimes it gets missed, or sometimes it's even worse. It's like the dog that chases the car, and finally when it catches, or at least catches up to the car, it doesn't know what to do next, right? Because that was my entire, this is the first P that you said, right? Progress, right? If you're measuring everything based by I need to be here, once you've reached there, many people don't know what to do next because their entire lives and careers have been based on reaching there, and they don't know what to do next, which is, by the way, true of FIRE as well, right? You may get that money and reach there, but then you're like, okay, this is great, but what do I do next, right?
It's not bad to have those goals. It's the attachment to the goals that makes it tricky, right? So if we start clinging to that, I have one of my clients just sold this company for a lot of money last week. And he said, the first lesson I learned, Gaston, is, it's so simple, but money doesn't buy happiness necessarily. And I realized he said the biggest takeaway from the Gita for him was the war never stops, right? It's not even the non-attachment to outcome. It's just, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? And we sometimes romanticize the end outcome. And then after that, I suddenly feel, bliss, joy, and ease the rest of my life. Is just not going to happen, right?
One of the most transformative books that I read that really helped
You're
me
going to say
frame
what I'm thinking.
You're probably going to say the same thing because you covered it in the onboarding. Is the same book? Okay, it's this book called Finite Games and Infinite
Yes,
Games.
damn it.
Okay.
That's what I wanted to make the point because it connects with Gaston's play as well.
Yes. Okay. I think for me, that was the one that really, probably one of the ones that really helped switch the thing for me. Because so the thing is, there is this fundamental difference between there are finite games and there are infinite games. Finite games are the games where there is a logical starting point and there is a logical end point. So if you play, say, a game of cricket, you play a game of football, if you basically do something, there are certain rules and you know what success is. Everyone knows what success is. The rules are quote unquote predetermined, right? And I think in India...
And it ends. The game ends.
And the game ends. And I think in India, what generally happens is we are trained to play finite games. And
class 10th exams, class 12th exams, IIT, JEE, engineering, MBA.
Get married, have kids. So I feel like we are playing a sequence of finite games. And I think what happens with that is when the rules become slightly more undefined and no one knows what winning looks like, that is when it leads to a certain amount of angst and questioning and all of these questions. Of course, now that is, you supercharge that and add catalysts on top of external conditions of economy and AI and technology and all of those things, and that's it. Everything just blows up. But I think fundamentally for me, infinite games are the ones. So infinite games are, since you spoke about Berkshire Hathaway, that's a classic example of an infinite game, which is the best form of purpose is not an end goal. The best form of purpose is what you're doing right now. The best form of progress is what you do tomorrow is better than what
you've been
doing.
meditating off late, right?
Yeah, I have actually.
You're talking really deep stuff.
If I can just add one sentence, Praveen, we could say purpose is a practice. It's not something you discover, then it's done, and then you just... Purpose is something you have to practice and cultivate on a almost daily basis, and it's a moving target. It's not that, the one-time discovery and then you sit back and relax. It's,
All right.
But I'll say that that's very hard. So anyway, Finite Games and Infinite Games by James Cars is the book that because you said the war never ends. That's essentially an infinite game. It just keeps going. And all you have to do is you have an obligation to play and you have an obligation to do the best every day. That's it. There's nothing else.
If we just unpack a little bit of what you said in the last 2 minutes and compare it to what you said about 10 minutes ago, I think it has...
Oh, I love this part. I love the part where now we're picking Praveen's
The lawyer is here.
inconsistencies.
The lawyer is here to make sure that I have contradicted myself. Yeah, sorry. Please go on.
No,
I mean,
but
go on.
No, but you were saying first that you didn't see this lack of ambition because you used fire as an example of it. And I think Gaston kind of unpacked that beautifully because he said what your ambition was driving you towards might not be aligned with corporate interests. But just what you said recently about the finite game that the Indian millennials were playing, if you put back that generational lens, or even Gen Z was playing, at least at the beginning, they've realized that those rules and those predictable outcomes aren't working. So while it was always random, like you said, it's become more unpredictable. It's become more unpredictable and the hand-waving chaos has happened. I think there is a through line to what is happening. But I think part of that is, and this goes back to what you said about the app interfaces, right? The Indian tech boom didn't create a generation of ambitious dreamers. It created a generation of people who were delivering small incremental improvements, which is progress because that was the progress they were told to measure. They weren't told to be better product managers.
Correct.
I mean, VCs, founders, however. But somewhere in the people who were holding professionals accountable, there was the idea that there is a KPI. Correct. You hit a 0.2% increment in people going from screen 1 to screen 2 as a product manager. You have won. Here is a super bike. You refer someone who makes that metric go up 0.8%. Here is another super bike and like 2 crores, right?
Now the attacks are getting very personal.
Yes.
But okay, go on.
No, but the point that
you're
I'm
right.
making...
No, I'm only saying that because I used to work at one of those companies with those referrals and superbikes. So that's
damn. Okay. My bad. But the point, the point that I'm making is I think that equation is turned, and the reason why all those experiences are becoming similar is that gamification of digital experiences in product spaces in India and in technology has led to a situation where everyone is chasing that same metric. So obviously everything's going to look the same because they're all competing with each other. These are all a game of percentages with the same baselines. I don't think there is progress or achievability in the idea of selling someone the snake oil, that this 0.1% improvement and a slight improvement in shareholder value is meaningful. There are people on our overemployed also. They are the opposite of fire, right? In the sense they're going for the same kind of incremental goal. But I think that disconnect that, at least for me, was the starting point of Arundhati's article, was that our earlier heuristic or mental model of ambition is broken, which I think syncs with what you said. So that's what I'm trying to figure out.
I agree with that.
So, I mean, Vipul, the one thing that I observed from, I think, what you said and what Gaston also said, earlier also in your conversations, Arundhati, PGK, etc. And this is something which has been sort of like a recurrent thing I've discussed with Praveen also, which is I feel, and this I joked about earlier on the beginning of the conversation where I said burn it all down and start it from scratch. So I do feel that we are at this place where there is less scope to rebuild, reboot many of the large existing companies because they're set, they're all doing same things. There isn't much room to play around with because you can't risk it, right? So they're all used to iterative thinking. They're all used to seeing what's the next product manager doing. He or she launches yesterday, we launch it. So that method is it. Second, their cap tables are now at a 10-year, 15-year age frame where there are lots of investors with expectations. So you cannot rock that boat, right? Their cultures, their people, they're all... I'm not saying that it's not possible, but I'm saying that like you're from just a system point of view, it's very hard. Thus, I think many of the points that we discussed earlier about where do you see excitement today? I think Gaston mentioned it, saying if you go and see many of the AI companies, you see people burning the midnight oil. I'm not saying that you got to burn the midnight oil, but I totally appreciate the concept of burning the midnight oil if you feel excited about it. Correct. The place where it's happening right now is AI companies. And yes, one reason is because AI is cool, but another reason that people forget is because they are small, because you have that energy, because the cap tables are small, because there are no priors. You can literally create something out of nothing and still have a meaningful stake in it. So, my throwaway comment about burn everything down and start it from scratch, after an hour, turns out to be yes, in some senses, we need to go back to small startups where there is purpose.
What you're saying is burn everything down, take that fire, then burn the midnight oil. That's what you're saying.
No, but
And then use that fire for your belly, right?
Yeah. Oh yes, and use that fire
thank
for
you.
your belly.
I'm telling you, that is, I'm definitely making that. The image of the fire coming back into the belly, right? I'm just like so fascinated. I'm besotted by that imagery that Gaston has put into my head. The fire going out of the belly, the fire coming into the belly, etc., and all that. But it is true. You see, I've observed this as well. There is boundless ambition in small AI startups and companies which have come up in the last 2 years. So it is absolutely not true that it doesn't exist. It's just that maybe it doesn't exist in quick delivery companies. Maybe it doesn't exist in IT services companies. Maybe it doesn't exist in 50,000, 100,000, 20,000 people companies, but it exists in smaller companies. But that's not a solution, right? So if I had to try and logically answer or bring this podcast to a conclusion by asking you, and I'll sharpen this so that we can't dance around it too much. How do we help, or how do we enable, or how do we support millennials with 10 to 15 years of experience who are working in larger organizations and more established organizations to find energy and purpose and ambition again? How should we go about it? Solutions only, please. No generalizations.
First thing is get very clear about what inspires you. I think when we teach if you want to inspire your people, which many of the leaders now need to do more than ever, you have to first be inspired yourself. And I've seen too many people not being deliberate or clear about tapping into their own sources of inspiration, which can be anything, can be spiritual, can be teachers, can be mentors, can be music, sports, whatever, but get inspired first so that can rub off onto other people. I think the second one is, really look inside. I actually think this quote unquote crisis we're talking about is an incredible opportunity to look at creating more conscious companies, more purpose-driven companies, which starts with personal purpose, but then has to be expanded. And I think people need to just start having more conversations about what motivates and drives us, what are our energy sources, what were our highlights this year, what were our peak moments or experiences in the company this year, where did I feel a sense of meaning and purpose this year? What were some of I think if people start having these conversations, and they can be triggered from leaders, from employees, between people, you will start creating a dialogue that will lead to something where we can together say, now, how do we ramp up this together, right? How do we build even more energizing work experiences here? Given it's quite diverse, right, and personal, but I think those conversations need to happen. That would be my suggestion.
I agree so much with what Gaston is saying. And part of it is also, I am in an AI startup. I was the first employee. We've grown to around 60 people. We've raised a Series A. We're going to go through a Series B. So I am living that dream. I love my work. I am driven by it. I do burn the midnight oil because the people I'm working with are in the US, so often I have to stay up late. And I don't complain. I do a little bit. Everyone does, but within reasonable bounds.
Oh, you just thought that what if my colleagues listen to this podcast? That's why you added that, right?
Yeah. Then I wouldn't have, but that's a separate story. No, but I think part of it is when I frame this question in terms of how you put it, right? If we think about what companies should be doing to keep their employees inspired, particularly slightly larger companies where that mission and that small team and that energy that comes from that might be gone for good or bad reasons. I think a lot of it has to do with how Gaston framed it, but from the company side. Stop selling them this idea that the primary goal in their life is to drive up some metric. Stop selling them the idea that the only place they're going to get satisfaction and meaning is in the workplace. Be self-aware enough to ask them to ask those 6 questions. Give them those 6 questions. Have that kind of program and tell them to have hobbies. I think part of what we miss when we think about how the likes of these Googles and Metas inspired that kind of loyalty was because they gave a lot. The whole thing about this free lunch at Google, like a little free lunch, right? Like they gave you great food, they had amazing offices. It was part of the enjoyment of being there because you felt that this was a two-way street. But I don't think that equation works anymore, particularly because people have been laid off. They don't see that kind of thing. With cost cutting, I don't know. I'm sure the vendors and all for that lunch have changed. All that being said, I think the main idea that I'm getting to is let these companies stop selling the Kool-Aid, be more self-aware and help people be more self-aware. They should be asking the questions Gaston is asking, right? Why are your employees doing what they're doing? How can you motivate them within that structure instead of trying to transplant them into this idealistic dystopia where they're only working for shareholder value or they're only generating things and ideas to drive the company forward? I think that's where that real work-life balance will come. And I think companies that do this will generate that kind of loyalty, because I think the problem right now is that disconnect. What people are telling you and what managers are telling you aren't matching your reality. So you're switching off from it or you're finding ways to subvert it. If that isn't there and if they're honest enough to say, hey, this is how things should be, this is how we can get there together. If not, then find something else or we'll figure it out. But I think that's what at least I would want to do. And we've been pretty open in our company as well. There have been people who have come and people who have left. But that's what I've seen work.
I have a slightly tactical solution. In the survey, we ask what comes in the way of you being ambitious. And one of the things that people said was lack of mentorship, right? And we've discussed here how managers themselves are stretched with so many people to manage. They don't have the time, maybe. So again, here from what Gaston said and what Vipul said too, that if you want to feel inspired, right? Like, go seek mentorship. Maybe it's not your manager. Maybe look at across industry level coaching or mentorship, but people have to actively seek that. And probably that's one way of fixing.
You've really scratched a raw nerve for me, so I do want to double down on that and specifically ask Gaston about it. And the thing, you said something that mentorship is one of the key things. I fully agree with that, right? Having a great mentor is like a huge career aid. If you can find that, that's half your problem solved. The second part of that is where I kind of whose responsibility is it to find you a great mentor? My experience has been, and what do I know? I'm a Gen X, very close to being a boomer, right? That mentorship which is thrust upon you feels less useful and valuable than mentorship which is sought.
No, that's what I meant.
Which is the point, which is that no, I'm just expanding upon that point. And thus I feel like along the way, so it's like, earlier on we also talked about that, you give the example of ESOPs, where you said some founders have said, I'll make it harder to get. I'm assuming one of the things in their minds, it's like, it must be something that you get after having done something and not just here, welcome to this organization and here your ESOPs have already started vesting, and thus it correlates with people saying that what is it even valuable? This is just funny paper money. It's monopoly money if I get it so easily, right? It's also the same, I feel, for mentorship. If mentorship is not sought, I, at some level, feel it devalues the relationship between a mentor and a mentee, where the mentor feels I have to mentor someone because my organization expects me to quote unquote be a mentor. And the person who receives that mentorship feels, oh, this is just one of the things that HR or the organization has structured. So therefore, I must get a mentor. So it starts to feel devalued. It starts to feel unsought, unwanted, unvalued right from the time that it's created. So therefore, I would love to see anything which is sought after be actually sought after. Maybe this is just me, a Gen X, me saying, I wish somebody would seek me out as a mentor, but no one does. But that rant aside, Gaston, how do you, this point that Arundhati mentioned about mentorship, what's your views on it?
Well, mentorship, first of all, it's a strategy to meet a need. And the need is learning, growth, and development, right? And mentorship is one of the ways to meet that need. There's many other ways to meet that need that you can fulfill. Now, what is interesting, in 10 days, I'll be in Mumbai conducting a mentor training for a big bank in India. So we had to actually train mentors and we have to train mentees. And I do think if you set it up well, now this would probably fall in your bucket, Rohin, of being set up by the company, right? But still, we're trying to create as much receptivity and clarity and tools and training, right, to make this work. But at the essence, I do think people need to own their development. I think people need to be in the driver's seat of their development.
Here.
I had a client last week. She said, listen, I just went bold and I just reached out to this famous leader and I said, can you be my mentor? And she actually said yes. And I love that, right? People just having the courage.
Thank you. You miss 100% of the shots that you don't take.
Yes. MJ. Yeah. No, it's, I think that's fully in for that, right? I think, but learning, growth, and development would be in my first P, right? The P of progress. So even if the company doesn't progress, if my personal growth and development is still, my learning curve is steep, generally those people still jump out of bed in the morning. So it's very important for leaders, if you have a dip in your company, again, diversify, double click on other energy sources, make sure that people get inspired. And maybe a last little tip for all the leaders out there. I think what we've learned today is that there's many different things that can motivate people, but we also agree on a few things that create what is called job misery. And this actually comes from Patrick Lencioni, a great leadership author as well. And he has this great model says, no matter which culture, no matter which company, people have three things that create job misery. The first is anonymity. When people do not feel seen, heard, they just feel like a number, that really puts people off, irrespective of which generation, which country, which culture. The second one is irrelevance. When you think that the work that you're doing is not making some difference in other people's lives or the fulfillment of other people, whether it's customers or other stakeholders, that's really off-putting. And the third thing is if you can't actually gauge whether you're making progress in the work that you're doing. So if there's no proper way to see if you're progressing in what you're contributing so many hours to. And so just an invitation to all the leaders out there, just make sure your people don't feel anonymous, irrelevant, and they don't have the means to measure their progress. That alone already will take out some of the tough parts. Yeah.
Praveen, what do you say? Take it home.
Okay, I'm actually going to take it home. I think, so you're talking about solutions. So I only have one solution. It's something we've all spoken about, but I just want to acknowledge and recognize how hard that solution is. And we're all coming down to some form of self-awareness. We're saying that, look, the answer to this lies with knowing a little bit or understanding yourself more. And in some ways, I agree with Gaston. Never a better time for self-awareness, because everything that was giving you meaning and preventing you or giving you that you didn't need to go seek for it is on the outside, and they're all kind of gone away. All those rules are getting twisted. All those heuristics and mental models, as Vipul said, are kind of gone. So never a better time to, because all those things on the outside are like completely screwed. But in some ways, it's also a really bad time, because when people lack those things, what they end up doing, what I have seen is, they retreat into areas and places that do not give them self-awareness. It's also never been easier to distract yourself completely with, watching videos or watching reels or doing other things on your phone. Never a better time to do that. Never a better time if you want to basically say, I want to do some self-awareness. Let me go into the balcony and think about my life. At that time, you're starting to wonder, the air that I'm breathing is really bad. I probably need to go inside where the air purifier is there. If you basically are in Bangalore and you say, okay, I'm going to go for a walk so that I can get some self-awernness, so that I can understand what's going on.
He's doing nihilism again, right?
We all don't live where Vipul lives, but you're in Bangalore and you walk outside, you try your best not to get run over by a bus. So there are so many things also blocking you from self-awareness. So, but I'll end with this, which is, and this is something that has helped for me, and I can't believe I'm doing this because usually Rohin is the one who does this. One of the movies that one of my favorite movies, and I know Rohin's favorite movie, is The Matrix. And there is this part in The Matrix where Neo goes to the Oracle and he's standing there. And he's there for a very important thing. He's trying to basically find out, am I the one? Am I the savior? Am I the person who's going to do everything? And she says, before I even answer that, please turn around and look up. And what does he see, Rohin? He sees a board. And what does the board say? It's this board.
I remember the scene where it's now it would really get your goat if I told you, would you have still done that? Or like, you know, I mean,
yeah,
that's
but
the
that
next
comes
scene.
later. But this is when he looks up and there is this board and it says temet nosse or something in Latin, which basically translates to know thyself. So I think fundamentally what she's trying to say is that it doesn't matter if you're the one or you're not the one. I don't have all the answers. You just have to know yourself. But I will say very, very hard time right now to know yourself. If you try to read a book about knowing yourself, you're very tempted after 10 minutes of reading it to, can I go to ChatGPT and summarize what it's really trying to say? So it's all quite hard. But the thing that has worked for me and something that I've been trying for a while is I recommend meditation. Just do it for like 10 minutes a day. It sort of starts to help a little bit.
Can we do it at 2x?
You don't do it at 2x, please. Okay, just you can do it as an app, you can do it by yourself, you can do it guided, unguided, whatever you like. But that's a practical thing that has helped me a little bit. And it just has to help you 1% or 2%. That's enough.
By the way, Rowan, if you want to meditate at 2x, it probably means you need to do it at half x.
I will tell you this, and this is a European reference, and I think most specifically a Belgian reference. Wim Hof was Belgian, right?
Funny detail, Wim Hof comes from the same village as I do in the south of the Netherlands, called Sittard. And I'm a big Wim Hof fan of the breathing. I take cold showers, ice baths, etc. That's a different episode, Rowan, but go ahead.
Yes. But I've just started, like, you know, I've tried meditation, doesn't work for me, but I can get on board with breathing. And for the last few weeks, I've been trying the Wim Hof breathing method, and it is incredibly calming, right?
Yeah.
So I do recommend it. That's my solution to listening to your inner voices and taking ownership of your career and finding purpose and progress in your careers as well. What a wonderful episode. We're going to link to a bunch of show notes, including those research pieces from Gaston, including Arundhati's article, including the final shareholder letter from Warren Buffett. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for a wonderful 2x2 episode. And thanks, PG, for taking it home by actually giving me a Matrix reference where I could not come up with it. So I don't think you can best that for a while. So rest on it.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Gaston. Thank you, Vipul.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of 2x2. This episode was mixed by our resident sound engineer, Rajiv CN. If you feel there's something we've missed out in this discussion, or you feel some numbers or facts don't add up, you can write to us with your thoughts at 2x2@theken.com. And if you're listening to this episode on Apple Podcasts, please show us some love for the podcast by leaving us a rating. Lastly, if you loved the episode, share it with people, friends, family members, colleagues who you feel might find it insightful as well. We'll be back next week with another exciting discussion and 2x2 for you to think about.